Joining me now is Arno Brand. He's the CEO of Gratomic, an early-stage graphite production company that has big growth plans and it wants to be environmentally friendly and create value for stakeholders. Arno, so good to see you here in Berlin.
Thank you very much for having me, Manuel.
Arno, how's the graphite market doing at the moment, and what for do we need graphite? Is it e-mobility?
Since 2012, we've seen a slight uptick in the demand of graphite globally. It's been primarily brought on by one rapidly growing sector within the scope of demand, which is ultimately e-mobility. That demand has slowly been increasing over the last 10 years to 2022. We've seen that edge up from its agnostic 6% annually, now slowly creeping up to 8 to 9% demand increase. With recent developments around the world and gigafactories coming online everywhere, we are seeing projections that are taking graphite demand into a fundamental restructuring of the supply and demand influx that will see graphite demand grow by as much as 400% in the next 8 years. And for that, we'll need a lot more graphite mines around the world.
How many players are there globally, and where do you see Gratomic?
So ultimately, graphite has been dominated by China for many, many decades. Since 2012, it's been the first time that the Western world has started playing a bigger part in graphite production globally. Some of the major players in the world outside of China today is Syra in Mozambique, Nacional de Graffiti in South America and Brazil. You have Northern Graphite that is now running the Lactazole plant in Canada that used to be owned by Emirates. Outside of that, the only other real producer coming into the market near term is Gratomic. We are the only one that is coming to market right now with vein graphite production of commercial scale outside of Sri Lanka, and ultimately looking forward to bringing those assets online.
You plan with 3 locations, right? Namibia, Brazil, Canada. So how productive can these 3 plants be?
So in Namibia, we started planning our production forecasts and built the processing plant to a 22,000 ton per annum capacity. Namibia is ultimately the first mover and the flagship for Gratomic because it simply had the highest grade of all the assets. When you go into the Alcan Graphite project, it has an average grade that's almost 42.5%, which is about 10 times the average commercial grade of any other asset that's being developed in the world today. So it naturally made sense for us to pursue this one as an initial or a first mover in the company into production. We brought on Capão Grosso last year. Capão Grosso was our secondary asset. What we are going to be doing with Capão Grosso going forward is we're going to be following a more conventional methodology in terms of its development going forward, meaning we brought out a technical report a few weeks ago that shows there's 5 to 30 million tons of graphite there at about 6%. If this goes through to 30 million tons of graphite, that will be the largest vein graphite in the world at that point in time. And as we complete our infill drilling programs on Capão Grosso, we anticipate that we are going to see quite an aggressive development into a standardized feasibility, pre-feasibility development. And once we get to that feasibility stage, we will be putting Capão Grosso in development as quickly as we did Outcome. The 2 projects combined, will have the capability to produce up to 111,000 tons of graphite per year once they're in full production. For Canada is an inherent asset that came into the company when we did a back-to-back into a public company many years ago. The Buckingham asset is really, really good. It's in a great class of assets. We will be putting this up for tender in the coming weeks. through a designated broker in Toronto that will be spinning that asset out into a new company to the benefit of the shareholders of Gratomic.
What are your growth plans for the next years?
So ultimately, what we're working on right now is we're going to bring Outcome into production. We're going to bring Capingrosso into production. On the back end of that, we realized that there is a tremendous bottleneck in mid-tier processing, meaning the ability of companies out there to micronize, spherize, and coat graphite, to include that into anode material is very limited. There's not a lot of capacity in the world. So what we are going to be doing is we're going to be partnering with a mid-tier processor in the coming months. We have identified this party already. What Gratomic brings to the table is the distinguishability to that mid-tier processing company that gives it the opportunity to be the first company in the world to take vein graphite into the anode. Before that, nobody's really been able to do that. So our growth projections ultimately to go from mine to mid-tier processing and eventually push all that material into the anode where it's needed in order for the e-mobility transition to continue at pace.
ESG is an important topic for all companies, I would say. How important is it for you?
Well, fundamentally, I'm a born Namibian. So because I'm a born Namibian, I want to make sure that we preserve the mother country. She is ultimately one of the most beautiful countries in the world. So fundamentally, preservation has to be at the top of everything that we do. And we have a whole designated team that makes sure that we comply to the highest ESG standards in the world. So much so that we've taken the liberty to map out our carbon footprint on the mine. It came down to 0.07 kilograms per ton of graphite produced, which is one of the lowest criteria, or one of the lowest classes in terms of ESG in the world for a graphite mine. Ultimately, this is because of the very high grade at Outcome. Once again, you have very high grade, much less power requirement in order to process the graphite to that 97.5% to 98% purity. Because of that, the ESG footprint is naturally much smaller, but we are going to do extra things like bring in solar to subsidize diesel generation and grid generation so that we can ensure that our footprint slowly diminishes to nothing over time. Hopefully with the aid in future of bringing in electrical equipment instead of diesel equipment.
You're a listed company. Your high was in April 2021, and this year you lost almost 2/3 of your value. Why is this? Well, what happened?
That's a tough question. It's a question most CEOs don't want to answer, but it's one that this one would happily answer. Ultimately, 2020 brought on COVID. Everybody ran to their houses. Everybody worked from their houses. The world was shut down. There wasn't much else to do out there other than, sit behind your computer and trade meme stocks. Ultimately, the markets did really, really well during 2020 and 2021. And, for a company like Gratomic, we followed in trend. We moved with the indexes. All the EV manufacturers out in the market came out at $100 billion and $1 trillion valuations. You saw tech stocks exploding in the US going to $3 trillion valuations. The market was incredibly lofty in those moments in time. Ultimately, as you started seeing stimulus leaving the market, or the US started pulling stimulus plans, Canada started pulling stimulus plans, there was less money going into the market. So ultimately, that resulted in a pivot of a lot of these companies that did very well in 2020 and 2021, combined with supply chain issues out of China and, the war in Ukraine. I mean, Omicron came around, inflation happened, interest rates adjusted. It was basically everything that could possibly go wrong did go wrong in the macro market. Now, a company like Gratomic is not going to be immune against market fluctuations. It's the same fluctuations that take us to all-time highs. When graphite, for instance, in June of next year start running into a deficit, you'll see all the graphite companies start moving off the bottom like all the lithium companies did. And, it's just the macro cycle that follows. And you as a CEO, you kind of had to put your head down and say, guys, I'm here to build a business. I have been building the business. I'm going to continue building the business, although it's not easy. We'll keep striving and keep making sure that we bring value to shareholders on the long term. Intermediate fluctuations will hurt, but you stick with the company long enough, those won't matter in the long run.
And maybe it's a good moment to buy cheap, and in the long run, the stock can grow.
Absolutely. I mean, shareholders have their responsibility to the business just as management does to continue supporting the business. If from a commercial sense, if something goes down to 33 cents from $1 and I bought it at $1 and I see it at 33 cents or 34 cents a day, it's a natural thing that you want to go buy that, because the future option is, you can go back to higher levels once that index kind of reverses off the 52-week low.
What's your outlook for Gratomic and maybe for the whole graphite business?
Well, as we start seeing the world go into supply chain deficits in the near future, our prediction is by June of next year, we put out a shareholder update about that the other day, by June of next year, we're officially in a supply chain deficit. Supply chain deficits drive price. More consumers driving for limited supply, that ultimately results in price movements. And when price movements come to the market in any commodity at such a rapid pace as we expect graphite to increase, the world's going to move forward, and the trajectory for all graphite companies alike will be very, very positive. I can see that for every other graphite company as well, not just Gratomic. I mean, that's just the way of the world. We all float together as balloons in the same market, same direction. So we don't see other people as competitors. We see them as peers, and have a very healthy outlook on the whole industry as a whole.
Says Arno Brand, the CEO of Gratomic. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you very much, Manuel. I hope you have a lovely day. Thanks.
Thank you. And thank you for watching. All the best for you. See you next time.